Hey, this is E-Rock. Welcome back to the Late Night Saga. I'm going to be reviewing a movie that I really should have watched a long time ago. Conan O'Brien Can't Stop. I actually used a small clip of this in my Conan versus Lopez video.
Hello? Job? Television job?
That actually wasn't a clip from this documentary. It was a clip from the trailer for this documentary. It doesn't actually appear in this movie. Just so you know where this fits in the timeline, Conan O'Brien had hosted Late Night at NBC for 16 years. And then he got bumped up to hosting The Tonight Show in late 2009, early 2010. And then he left after 7 months, somewhat controversially. And then it wasn't until about 9 months later that he reappeared on TV on TBS. Conan on TBS was that show. In the time that he had off in between shows, he decided to embark on this live comedy music tour, what was called the Legally Prohibited from Being Funny on Television tour.
The terms of my settlement, I'll be honest with you, say that I can't host another show for 7 months. That's what it says, yeah.
And that tour is the subject of this documentary, Conan O'Brien Can't Stop. So this movie covers that tours from the behind-the-scenes perspective. You see them, planning the tour after the end of The Tonight Show, and then you see them. This is the period where Conan, I guess, prior to this, had not had any sort of an online presence, really. So he started a Twitter account, mostly for the purposes of selling tickets to the show, which sold out immediately in all the cities. And this may have been the beginnings of Conan, really taking over sort of like an internet presence, because now he's got his own website, Team Coco, he's got a podcast, and he seems to be much more aware of that aspect of it. Before it was just TV he was doing, and fans would post things on YouTube. And I don't know if NBC was posting much on YouTube or on their own website prior to 2010. But the point is, he probably could have taken, 7-8 months off in between these two shows and just relaxed a little bit, got a nice well-earned vacation after 16, 17 years on TV, and probably could have, spent the time coming up with the ideas for his new show. But instead, he's got the band, he's got his assistant Sona, he's got the same band, he's got Andy Richter, a lot of the same writers and producers from his Late Night and Tonight Show on NBC, who would later follow him to TBS also. They all helped him produce this live tour. And it seems like he's constantly overbooked. He's not only doing the show, which I don't know how long the show was every day, 1 to 2 hour live performance, in which he does a lot of singing and he does comedy, and he's doing a one-man show. And, I'm not sure Conan has the background for that, so maybe it sort of took him by surprise how much energy that took, but to do his hour to 2 hour show every day, or however, I don't know how many days off he got during his tour. Doesn't look like very many. The problem is that they would book him. He would have to go to a new town every day. It'd set up the show, but then he would be meeting and greeting with the people who set up the venue, or whoever invited him into town or whatever. They would want to do, press, photo op, local news or whatever, and he was doing a lot of autograph signings, and he was just talking and schmoozing with people frequently at these before show parties and then after show parties. And at some point he just kind of says, this is too much, you gotta calm it down. But it seems to be him, they keep kind of saying, you don't have to do that, you can say no, you don't have to go to the party, you don't have to do the autograph signing. But he kind of can't stop himself. I guess that's where the documentary gets its title, because I think anywhere that he's asked to go and perform, he just sort of is compelled to do so. We get to see lots of little pieces of the show that he actually put on, which is cool. He does a lot of singing and he does comedy. What we don't get to see, and what we see the more glimpses of backstage, is that he had a lot of guests show up, in certain towns. For example, in New York City, Stephen Colbert and Jon Stewart show up.
That's what I just realized.
You want to fight, Irish?
I will fight you any place, anytime.
Well, we're in Radio City. There's only one possible way to fight here.
Anything that gets us to separate our noses and lips.
How about a good old-fashioned dance-off?
I don't know how planned it was, how much lead time they had, but I guess they were just kind of there that day and they showed up and they worked something out backstage, and then they came out on stage with him and did a bit, which is like 10 minutes long, where they do a dance off. In this documentary, you don't see that part of the live show. You see some of the behind the scenes of them planning it. There's a few other guests like that show up in various cities, and I don't know how much they did on stage, but we don't get to see much of that. We're mostly seeing what's going on backstage and kind of just focusing on Conan's burnout and his mindset, I guess. That's what this was all about. I think the thing that I took away from this, having finally seen it now, is that perhaps Conan's obsession he seems to want to prove something, maybe just to himself, by doing this thing. And maybe he always wanted to just have a chance to live a rock and roll lifestyle and do all these live shows. Maybe it was just sort of a novelty, but again, he could have just taken this time off in between his two big TV shows. He didn't have to do this, so it seems like maybe he was just trying to prove something, and then maybe that just goes back to how this whole mess started. When you think about it, and Howard Stern said this in one of his interviews, but Conan probably would have been better off staying in the late night time slot on NBC. Because I don't know all the reasons why he didn't work out on The Tonight Show, but it seems like maybe his style of comedy was a little leashed, as Norman MacDonald might say, when he moved down to 11:30. Maybe he was better off staying in the late night gig, doing whatever he wanted, kind of being left alone. And he didn't have to, it's like this whole situation that was created, I suppose it was his agent and the fact that Leno didn't have an agent, that they were able to push and say, tell NBC that you got to hire Conan. He's going to be the next big thing. Because Conan didn't really have any leverage to demand that. What was he going to do? Go to Fox at 11:30 and compete against both Leno and Letterman and be the distant third? But it seems like maybe, again, he had to prove something to himself by pushing to get this Tonight Show slot. And maybe he pushed a little too hard, and maybe it just wasn't a good fit. And he could have just stayed at the late night slot and probably just continued to do it for the rest of his career. So I think maybe that's just part of the same mindset of why he pushed himself to do the live show and then directly into the TBS show. Of course, in the later years of that, he was doing multiple things. He was not only doing the TBS show, but then he was doing the podcast, and he started a whole podcast network and gave a lot of podcasts to a lot of other people that he works with, like Andy has his own podcast, and I think Sona even ended up with one, and several other comedians. Again, I don't know if he's just sort of biting off more than he can chew or just seeing what he can do, but it's interesting. It was just an interesting look. This documentary was just an interesting look into the behind the scenes. And now that I've seen, several behind the scenes things at TBS and at NBC, I see a lot of the same players showing up in all these. And it's just interesting kind of getting to know the Conan crew. It's too bad you can't see the live shows. Like all great live events, they just existed once for the people that saw it, and it's sort of just lost to the sands of time. This documentary, Conan O'Brien Can't Stop, is available, I think, on Amazon. It's also on YouTube right now, which is where I saw it. So, hurry up and watch it before it vanishes from that platform. But as far as the actual live shows, you only see a few pieces of it in this documentary. And from what I've seen on YouTube, there's only a handful of people who recorded on their cell phones bits and pieces of the live shows.
One of the problems, ladies and gentlemen, is it's a little unclear whether we can have the masturbating bear on the show tonight because he may be the intellectual property of NBC. The masturbating bear is intellectual property. It took us some MIT scientists to come up with this right here. Anyway, some roadkill in a thong. But I had an idea that might avoid, don't touch it, Andy, don't. Not every guy likes that.
It would kind of be interesting to see if you could piece together an entire live show from the cell phone recordings and the bits and pieces that are in this documentary. You might be able to sort of put together one complete live show, because I don't think anything from that has ever been released officially, and I haven't seen anything anywhere other than these few clips. From the clips I've seen, it looks like they probably did this. He probably had the same material and he sort of did the same monologue at every show, but then he would have different guests at each show, and maybe he would talk to members of the audience, or he would work out some new business. So there's probably different pieces at each live show, but a lot of it's probably the same. So it would be interesting. So I recommend checking out on YouTube whatever you can find on that before that's gone, and this documentary, Conan O'Brien Can't Stop. It was interesting. I liked it. Check it out.